Welcome back to the Back of the Gap podcast. I am Joey, joined by Ware and Travis. And today we're going to be talking about a very controversial question. Can Christians celebrate Halloween?
Is it that controversial?
In some Christian spheres, yes.
It really is. Like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but when we get to the October season, there's always. Now, I'm not making fun of these people, but I'll see like there'll be Christians on Instagram or Facebook, and they'll have like a little reel, like a little video, and it'll be like top 10 reasons why not to celebrate.
Yeah.
You seen those?
Absolutely. That's one of the reasons I wanted to do this episode, because I just see these videos, or I'll see, parents posting on Facebook, just like really trying to act all high and mighty because they don't celebrate Halloween in their household.
Yeah.
And it's a very interesting topic because I don't think that there is a clear answer. Because a lot of times people want to phrase it as, should Christians celebrate Halloween?
Yeah.
And it's not, I don't think that we would say that Christians should. The real question is, are Christians allowed to celebrate Halloween?
Yeah.
Halloween is not mentioned in the Bible. It's not a day that you should or should not celebrate. It's, okay, well, is this something that Christians are allowed to do and can participate in, or is this something that we should maybe shy away from? So let's kind of get into some of the reasons that some people would say Christians can't celebrate Halloween.
The number one thing I always hear a lot is that, it's a play on like pagan beliefs or something like that, which I'm not just an expert on pagan beliefs, but they're like, you're celebrating a season where they celebrate like demons or ghouls and all this stuff, and it dates back to pagan traditions or something like that. Again, I'm not just an expert, so I'm kind of just saying stuff, but that's the biggest reason that I see is that.
Yes. Travis, do you see any things that people talk about maybe discourage Halloween?
Well, I think one of the main ones, and this doesn't even have to, this reason doesn't even have to throw out Halloween completely, but some people still do. Main reason I see is just gore levels, just kind of like wanting to be afraid, just kind of like that kind of stuff is normally like kind of shied away from and kind of viewed down on within the Christian community. And in some cases, it's warranted. In other cases, maybe it's like, all right, maybe we can, be a little more, can't find the word. Anyway.
Yeah. Like you mentioned fear, and as also another complaint that I've seen where it's like, it's a season where we're always monsters and all this stuff, and it's like, well, we're called to walk not in fear, and so people kind of try to draw a parallel from that scripture. Yeah. I'm not familiar where that's at within the Bible.
I know what you're talking about. You're talking about the verse where it says God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of
I think it's that. I'm pretty sure
2 Timothy somewhere.
Okay,
don't quote me on that.
I'm pretty sure it's that verse that they're quoting or referencing, and they're like, hey, well, we shouldn't be trying to dress up or celebrate a holiday that causes fear, that makes kids or adults scared, and we shouldn't be what's the word? Not incentivizing. What's the word? Not propaganda.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Endorsing.
Yeah, endorsing, where we shouldn't be putting our money. I guess so.
Like endorsing the bad parts of Halloween. Yeah. I kind of see those arguments as well. Just the, you'll see from the super fundamentalist camps, like, this holiday is anti-God, and it was started by the pagans, and it's all about demons, and just on the face of it, everything, just ignore it completely. But then I'll also see maybe some more reasonable takes where it's like, well, we really shouldn't be celebrating this because the only point of this holiday is to like talk about witches and sorcerers and these things of the occult, right? And it's because it's dangerous, we should just shy away from it.
Yeah.
And I would argue that, at least from my childhood, my friends, most people in the world, or in America, sorry, Halloween is dressing up and getting candy.
Yeah.
And that is the full extent of the holiday. You'll carve a pumpkin with a maybe scary face, but like no one's scared of a jack-o'-lantern, right?
Yeah.
And when we really boil it down, most people's Halloween experience has nothing to do with the occult, has nothing to do with demonology, and can be completely consistent with a Christian life.
Yeah.
And so because of that, I think it's pretty easy for me to say that Halloween is absolutely permissible. And just because there are some people who try to, use it to represent bad things doesn't mean that, well, no one should ever touch it ever, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off.
Okay.
That's always kind of been where I'm at. Is like, I don't think it's a bad thing, but it's the way you celebrate it. Like how do you choose? I think there's nothing wrong with like a little me in like the 5th grade wearing a Spider-Man costume, going trick or treat, and getting candy. I don't think there.
Yeah.
y'all like that voice when I did.
I did like that voice.
I think there's nothing wrong with that. Just that element of it, I can understand where people wouldn't like it. I get the argument of it, but I do think there is a way in which you can celebrate it that's not hypocritical, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can look at a lot of other holidays that people use as an excuse to commit sin, right?
Yeah.
Oh, everybody's off of work for, such and such. New Year's, right? New Year's, we're all going to get together and drink and do whatever, yada, yada. That does not mean that Christians should not celebrate New Year. It just means you shouldn't participate in that part of it, right? Yeah. You can still have the holiday. And for Halloween, like, you can still have the fun parts that are still consistent with Scripture without having to throw it all away.
Yeah, for sure.
An argument I just thought of when you were describing, like, for the most extent of an American experience is just dressing up and getting candy. I would say there's still quite a large amount of Americans who will, during the month of October and like before Halloween or leading up to it, watch like horror movies, maybe go to a haunted house, that kind of stuff. And I'd say those are still decently common as well. And so I guess I would like to hear what you said about that.
Those are common. I want to pick up on that a little bit later,
Okay.
right?
Ooh, yeah.
Because I think that is something that we do want to talk about. But first, for what we've talked about so far, I have Scripture to back it up. I don't just want to be talking out of our butts and saying, "Oh, well, we did it as a kid, so it's okay."
Yeah.
Right. So in 1 Corinthians, in chapter 8, Paul is talking about food offered to idols. Right. There was big controversy within the Church of Corinth where they're like, well, these people are eating food that was sacrificed to pagan idols, so they're sinning, right? They can't eat that food. And Paul is like, those gods aren't real. It doesn't matter. It says, now concerning food offered to idols, we know that all of us possess knowledge. This knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. If anyone imagines that he knows something, he does not yet know as he ought to know. But if anyone loves God, he is known by God. Therefore, as to the eating of food offered to idols, we know that an idol has no real existence and that there is no God but one. For although there may be so-called gods in heaven or on earth, as indeed there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is one God, the Father, from whom all things and for whom we exist, and one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom are all things and through whom we exist. It continues on talking about, well, some people are thinking that this food is defiled. Some people are thinking that this food is, you can't eat it. But he says, these idols have no real existence. Mm-hmm. Food offered to these idols, you can eat it. It doesn't matter, right? This is, if we're not going to give any power to this God, because this God has no power, only God the Father, our God, has power, well, then it shouldn't matter that this food was sacrificed to that idol.
Yeah.
And so in the same way for Halloween, people will claim, well, all these Satanists are just, really hoping that Christians get into Halloween. Who cares? Satan has no power over us, right? If we want to dress up and eat candy, and we do it to honor God and to build community, and we're doing it with the right intention in mind,
Yeah.
it doesn't really matter, right? But there are some things that we can't talk about that do matter.
A lot of the holidays we do have can be tied back to like festivals from a lot of these like pagan civilizations, and the Christian church back in the day,
Back in the
gap, kind of revamped with their and kind of meshed the regular like modern like traditional traditions with their own to kind of like remaster the holiday, I guess.
Yeah. That is something that you saw across time. You know, you would take this pagan holiday, and the church is like, well, we don't need to participate in this pagan holiday, but you're not going to be able to get people to not celebrate, right?
Yeah.
This is something they've been doing for years. And so you make it Christian. You reclaim that.
Yeah.
And I think that Christians absolutely can and should do that for Halloween. There's nothing that says that because it maybe had a negative origin means that we can't celebrate it or that we can't conquer it for ourselves.
Yeah. I like that point. That's a good point. So my good buddy Luke and I were talking one time. We were talking about, you know, should Christians be leaving social media? And he but he stumbled across a video, and it was a guy, and he was a Christian saying that, well, we shouldn't just give up social media. You know, social media has turned into this very provocative thing. It's sexualized. It's this and that, all these things. But this guy was arguing, saying, well, us as Christians, we shouldn't just give that up and let them win. You know, that we need to kind of like have a foothold, and let's try and use something that people want to take and use it for bad, and let's try and use it for good, and let's try and build that up.
Yeah.
And I was like, I thought that was a really good point. Now, I will say everyone's circumstance is different. Some people may not need to have social media within their life, but for some people where they can have it, and you are a Christian, I think it's okay to have it. But are you doing it in a holy manner? What's your purpose for using it? And for this context, and I don't know if you plan to go into this, but lots of churches do a thing called like Fall Fun Fest, or they'll have like a like a Fall Fun Fest. I don't
trunk or treat.
Yeah. The trunk or treat. I don't know if that's just a term that our church specifically uses, or like if all churches use that.
Yeah, you know, different places use different things, but most churches have an event, right?
Yeah, and so it's like it's our way of saying, let's take this holiday and let's use it for good.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's a good point. Especially, I like how you brought up social media. There's so many people that just are like, well, social media is just evil because evil happens on it.
Yeah.
Social media is just a platform. Anybody can post to it and do good or bad.
For sure.
Right? And the same thing, Halloween, October 31st, it's just a day that people choose to celebrate.
Yeah.
Right? You can celebrate good things. You can celebrate bad things. But also, like you said, not everyone needs to have social media, right? Mm-hmm. If it's going to become a problem, if you're going to spend, 18 hours a day on TikTok, maybe you don't need to have that on your phone.
Yeah.
And so if you're just so focused on, oh my gosh, Halloween is just the best holiday ever, I can't wait, it's all I think about all year, maybe you don't need to just celebrate every aspect of it, right? Just, you can buy a costume and hang out with some friends, and that be the end of it. But no, as far as reclaiming it and doing good, I think it's good you brought up the Fall Fun Fest, Trunk or Treat. Even though most Christians will celebrate Halloween, churches still won't call their events a Halloween event.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's fine. But that's been something that we've seen at our church where, it's as simple as, we'll go set up a couple of games in the gym with some candy, or we'll go out to this park and just have candy, games, costume, whatever.
Yep.
And all sorts of people from the community will come.
Yeah.
You advertise free food, people are going to show up.
For sure.
And that's such a good influence for those people, right?
Yeah.
that, well, as a church, we could decide, well, actually, no, Halloween is bad, and we're just going to completely remove ourselves and just completely miss out on that impact.
Yeah.
And so then you could have the argument, well, should you call your event a Halloween event, or should you call your event a fall fun fest? You know, you can get into the semantics of that and whether it matters or not, but like people know it's Halloween, right?
Yeah.
And I think that missing out on those opportunities to reach your local community, well, that's really going to hinder the church from growing and performing the mission that it's supposed to be, performing, right?
And that just made me think about kind of something. It's something in Scripture. I can't remember where it's from, but where it kind of mentions, should we? Where I think it had more to do with. I think it was one of Paul's letters when he's addressing kind of like how the Jews are telling the Gentiles, like, oh, no, you can't do any of this stuff. Like, all the stuff that y'all did before, you have to give it up, and you basically have to be like us. And
You got to go get circumcised. You got to follow all of the Mosaic law.
Mm-hmm. And so I think, and like they were saying that they had to do this, but more so I'm kind of mentioning how they were telling them that like they had to basically abandon their own cultures and like abandon those kind of things. And to some degree, yeah, they absolutely had to. Like there's certain things that they had to abstain from, certain practices that were just, infested with sin, and there was no way around that. There's no way they were going to glorify God doing that. But, Paul mentions that they should, like he mentions that like you're a Christian, you are where you are, and like you have to live as a Christian in the community that you're in. You can't just like abandon it and just kind of like hole up yourself and just be like, oh, we're Christians, so we don't do that stuff.
Yeah.
And so I think it, like you said earlier, it's very, very important to be involved in the community, be involved with what the world is doing, not necessarily to take part in everything the world's doing, but to be involved so that you're able to reach people and you're able to just show that Christians aren't just people who are just going to, act like they're better or completely stay away and shy away from other people.
Yeah.
So.
In another spot, Paul writes, and this is also in 1 Corinthians in chapter 9, I'm starting in verse 19 here. For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them. To the Jews I became a Jew, in order to win Jews. To those under the law I became as one under the law, though not being myself under the law, that I might win those under the law. To those outside the law I became as one outside the law, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside the law. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. I do it for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessings. And this is kind of coming more from the perspective of those who are already Christians, right? He's not talking about those who are new, who need to, you can still hold on to your culture. This is saying, well, if you're a part of the fold of God, and you have these people in your community around you, like, you have to meet them where they are. You can't just expect them to walk into your doors when all you do is completely isolate yourself and just talk bad about them, right? That does not mean that you compromise on your character. Does not mean that you give in to sin. And we're going to kind of get into that in a minute. But, when it comes to something like Halloween, it means, well, yeah, you can have a little event where people have fun. They can come and get candy, wear a costume and participate. And that's becoming all things to all people, even in that very simple way, right? But as we mentioned earlier, there are some things that Christians cannot compromise on, and we can get into that, right? What are some examples of maybe some things that are not allowed?
Skimpy costumes.
I'm
sorry, I stole it. It's more obvious one.
Well, I was like, that's a huge reason why I was like, if you're a Christian and you're thinking, should I go to this Halloween party? Your answer is no. Because, like, that's just going to be something that's going to be unavoidable.
Unless it's a Christian party. Like,
okay.
People are,
okay.
if I want to have some
But
friends
that's a
over.
fall event. That's not a Halloween.
That's a fall. That's right. It's a fall event.
Oh man, that's funny.
It's not called a costume party. It's called we're just playing dress up.
What's something else that maybe we should not compromise on?
Well, like I said earlier, just like these parties where you know something's going down. But that's a whole nother thing. It's like just we could have a whole podcast episode on, you know, not being involved in like events or things that you know are not going to glorify God anyway.
Yeah, you know, some of these maybe gatherings where nothing productive is happening.
Yeah.
Well, we can put it at that, right?
Yeah.
Whether that's just how people are talking at this party, whether that party's just everybody gossiping about everybody else, or
What substance is at the party?
substance abuse, you know. And then I think one that we covered earlier was maybe your more R-rated horror movies.
Yeah.
That, you know, there's always a couple of big movies coming out on Halloween about just killing a bunch of people and looking at some scary looking monster thing.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think in these areas, for us, it's pretty clear. Like, we're able to pull these examples pretty quick of like, well, these are things we need to avoid. But it can be so difficult for those not as involved in I hate to say church culture, but that's kind of what it is, you know, because, I mean, culture around us, those things are normal. Those things are celebrated, and those things are what people do on Halloween, right? And so, you know, for all three of these, we've got to realize, like, well, what are your intentions with what you're doing here, right?
Yeah.
If you're wearing a costume, well, what are your intentions with it, right?
Yeah.
Should not be to get a bunch of attention in that way, right? You can get attention by having something goofy that, you know, covers you up, or you could just wear a costume that you think you look good in that is appropriate, right?
Yeah. The dinosaur costume is a classic.
Yeah, the blow up dinosaur costume, hysterical. And that you can even use multiple times a year.
Yeah.
Sure can. I've seen it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it works.
Firsthand.
Saw that at VBS.
Yeah, Vacation Bible School, church camp,
Someone we knew bust out.
regular Thursday, just whatever. But no, it's like, well, what is your intention with buying this costume, right? And then, like, for parties, if you're invited to some event, like, well, who's hosting it? And you should generally be able to know, like, what's going on.
Yeah.
Right? And if not, you've got to have the courage to show up to a party, look around, see what's happening, and be like, oh, no, see you guys.
Yep.
Like, I'll see you later. Like, I know that can be very awkward, and, you know, I'm lucky enough I've never been put in that position. But I think as Christians, like, we need to be able to not be rude about it, but just be like, well, I don't need to be here, so I'm going to leave.
Yeah. It's like it's something that could not only make you sin, but let's just say you go to a party or you go watch a movie, and it's like, okay, well, if it doesn't make you sin, well, what perception are you casting upon yourself? Kind of, you know, if that makes sense. Where it's like, what?
Your witness.
Yeah, exactly. Your witness. Where you go to a party, and it's like, okay, well, I don't partake in the stuff that other people are doing, but you're saying, hey, my life stands for X, Y, and Z. Let's say that someone you may know is at that party who may struggle with that stuff, and you're trying to witness them, or even if you're not personally witnessing to them, but they just know of you and they know your character and they see you at this party. Well, they don't see you for the whole however long the party is.
Yeah.
So their imagination may go to, oh, well, so and so says this, but they're at this party, so they probably did X, Y, and Z thing, you know. So that's a danger too.
Yeah. And then, you know, we don't have to go super in depth, but I do think we should cover some specifics of, like, maybe why is it not okay for a Christian to go watch a scary movie, right? The demons are the bad guys, right? Why can't I watch this movie where they're killing demons or whatever? Or or demons are killing such and such, or there's all these, like, what's so wrong with that, right? Travis, what do you think?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with
Travis just got back from watching It.
Is this a bad time to put in a plug for The Exorcist?
This is a bad time. Yeah.
I think it has a lot to do with how it's painted. Because even within a movie, something can be the negative focus of the movie and still be painted very incorrectly. You know, I think it depends a lot on how it's painted, how much it might be celebrated, and I think like those two things have a lot to do with it. And also, at a certain point, you should, gosh, all the words are losing. Anyway, at a certain point, you should probably cap yourself off. Like, I think there's a reasonable amount of anything, really, from the world that you don't just need to be so invested and obsessed and ingrained with something. If your purpose is maybe just to watch a movie with some friends who you're trying to go closer with, depending on the how the movie paints things, I could see it as being maybe acceptable. Now, if things are like, if it's more like worshipped or more, celebrated, obviously you probably need to sit that one out. Other than that, I think you just really need to evaluate yourself and evaluate how much you're invested in all this stuff and how much you look forward to it, and maybe see if you're becoming obsessive about it. Because the only thing that we should really be obsessing over is reaching people for Christ and growing our relationship with Him. And so, just in general, like, we don't even, just in general, like, I know we're talking about Halloween, but with other holidays, other things like that, where people can kind of view a holiday more positively than they even view, growing their relationship with Christ. So, just in general.
Yeah, I think that's a good perspective on it. I think that when it comes to movies like these, I mean, that argument really applies to any movie, right?
Yeah.
Like, what are your intentions with going to do that? And I think that's something that we need to be really big on, is intentionality. But I think specifically with these movies, there is some room to be like, well, this movie is demonic, and so just because of that,
Yeah.
I'm just not going to see it. I think that most Halloween movies, like, I don't recommend going to see rated R movies in general. I have only seen a handful in my lifetime. Like, if it's rated R, well, as a Christian, do you really need to be ingesting that? Probably not. But I think that there is an even further step of vetting where it's like, okay, if this movie is specifically dealing with demonic forces and either making light of them or incorrectly portraying them, it's like, these are real spiritual forces that I'm just continually numbing myself to because, well, they're just in movies or they're just in this and they actually work like this. And I think there's a real danger from doing that and then kind of numbing yourself to that idea to where you don't recognize actual spiritual warfare.
Yeah.
Right?
I think it's like talking about R-rated movies, like there's even PG-13 movies that should be rated R now.
Yeah.
Like, they're like there's some bad PG-13 movies out there where it's just like, man, they can get away with stuff now in movies now. So, my voice is cracked. Did y'all hear that?
I did hear that.
Yeah.
We're keeping it's all good. It's all love, But
What?
so for R-rated movies, I think even PG-13 movies is like we need to be careful with, because there's even some raunchy PG-13 movies out there. And even like horror movies. You know, I know we're specifically talking about, you know, like the Halloween stuff, but there's even like stuff like the sexual stuff and language and those horror movies as well. But yeah, I think it's what's being depicted within this movie. How's it being depicted? Personally, I think if we're on the topic of like, what's that one movie with John Krasinski in, and they're trying to be quiet?
Oh, A Silent Place.
A Quiet Place.
A Quiet Place.
Quiet Place, which is like, it's kind of like horror thriller. It's just a monster who comes in and attacks a family. I think in that scenario, it's like fine.
Yeah, I don't really think there was any language in that movie. I could be mistaken on that.
It's because they had to be quiet.
Yeah, they had to be quiet, and also they're with kids the whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I think that was a fine, scary movie.
Yeah,
right?
and you know what? And the movie was also about family.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
It really was. I'm making a joke, but it really was about family and loving your family.
It is still one of the scariest things I've ever watched. I don't like scary movies.
Joey,
so
that's good.
This
that's
aspect is very easy for me.
Yeah, it's easy for you.
Joey, I just think you haven't ingested a whole lot of scary movies.
Because I'm not supposed to.
The Saint.
No.
But no, in all seriousness though, it's like, yeah, what's the content, what's in it, what's being portrayed, what's being said, where are you watching?
Yeah.
All of that has to go into it. Now there are some people who argue don't watch it at all. I get that. I'm not going to argue that because I completely get that. So I really don't want to argue that. But yeah, I think for people who are more okay with watching that stuff, I'm just kind of like, well, just be careful. Like, what are you ingesting?
Yeah, it's just about being mindful and being intentional, which is kind of what this whole episode is boiled down to. You know, it's like this is Halloween is a holiday where people do, I guess, you know, celebrate sin, if you will, to a certain extent, maybe more so than other holidays. And it's like, you're celebrating every other holiday and you don't have a problem with it. Just be intentional, be mindful.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been the Back in the Gap podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next week.